My neighbor demanded I pay half to renovate his driveway because you'll benefit from it too. When I refused, he started telling everyone I was a selfish, cheap jerk who hates the neighborhood. My other neighbors looked at me strangely until I pulled out my property deed and said, "Then let's see who really owes what." I've lived in my modest home in a quiet suburb of Columbus, Ohio, for over 25 years. The neighborhood is filled with retirees, young families, and folks who generally keep to themselves. My house sits on a corner lot, and my driveway is entirely on my property. No shared access, no easements, nothing. About a year ago, a new neighbor moved in next door. Let's call him Rick. Rick was in his early 40s, always wearing flashy clothes and driving expensive cars. He introduced himself with a big smile and a firm handshake, and I thought he seemed like a decent guy. One afternoon, Rick knocked on my door. "Hey, neighbor. I've been thinking about redoing my driveway. It's got some cracks, and I want to widen it a bit. Since our properties are adjacent, I figured we could split the cost. You'll benefit from it too." I was taken aback. "Rick, my driveway is separate from yours. I don't use your driveway at all." He chuckled. "Come on, it'll improve the curb appeal for both our homes. Plus, if I extend it a bit, you could use it for extra parking." I politely declined. "I appreciate the offer, but I don't need extra parking, and I'm not interested in contributing to your driveway renovation." His smile faded, and he nodded curtly before walking away. A week later, I noticed some neighbors giving me the cold shoulder. People I used to chat with during morning walks now barely acknowledged me. I overheard snippets of conversations. "Doesn't care about the neighborhood, won't even help a neighbor out. So selfish." Confused, I approached my neighbor, Mrs. Thompson, who lived across the street. "Is everything okay? I feel like people are upset with me." She hesitated. "Well, Rick mentioned you refused to help with the driveway renovation. He said you'd benefit from it but didn't want to contribute." I was stunned. That's not the full story. He wanted to widen his driveway onto my property and expected me to pay for half of the renovation. I declined. She looked surprised. "Oh, I didn't realize that." I decided it was time to clear the air. I retrieved my property deed and the survey documents that clearly outlined the boundaries. I made copies and placed them in envelopes, along with a letter explaining the situation, and delivered them to my immediate neighbors. In the letter, I wrote, "Dear neighbor, I understand there may have been some misunderstandings regarding my neighbor Rick's driveway renovation. I want to clarify that his driveway is entirely on his property, and he proposed extending it onto mine, requesting I pay for half of the renovation. I declined, as I have no need for additional parking and prefer to maintain my property as is. Attached are copies of my property deed and survey for your reference. Thank you for taking the time to understand my perspective. Sincerely, your name." Over the next few days, neighbors began to approach me, expressing their apologies for jumping to conclusions. Mrs. Thompson baked me a pie as a peace offering. Mr. Johnson offered to help with yard work. Rick, on the other hand, was not pleased. He confronted me, accusing me of turning the neighborhood against him. "I just told them the truth," I replied calmly. I provided them with the facts. He stormed off, and I haven't heard from him since. This experience taught me the importance of standing up for oneself and the value of clear communication. While it was uncomfortable to be the subject of gossip, addressing the issue head-on helped restore my reputation and relationships with my neighbors. Sometimes, the best way to handle a situation is to let the facts speak for themselves. Things didn't settle down after that. Rick might have gone quiet, but he wasn't done. A few weeks later, I noticed orange flags and spray paint marks on the edge of my lawn right where our properties met. I didn't know what they meant at first, but I took pictures just in case. 3 days after that, a construction crew showed up. They started unloading equipment and cutting into the grass between our driveways. I walked out and asked what they were doing. The guy in charge looked at a clipboard and said, "Expanding the driveway. Says here it's approved." I asked by who. He pointed toward Rick's house. I marched over and knocked on his door. He opened it with that smug look he'd perfected. "You told a crew to start digging into my yard?" "It's not your yard," he said. "The survey must be wrong. The land next to my driveway has always looked like shared space. I'm just improving the look of the block." I told him, "You touch an inch of my property and I'm calling the cops." He rolled his eyes. "Then do it." So I did. When the officer arrived, I showed them my original deed, the survey, and the photos I'd taken earlier in the week. The officer stopped the crew and told Rick he needed to halt all work until this was settled. Rick looked furious, like I'd just burned down his house or something. He muttered under his breath about petty old men with nothing better to do. A few days later, I started getting city code violation notices in the mail. Grass too tall. Shed too close to the property line. Fence needs repair. Trash bins visible from the street. They were all things that hadn't been a problem for 20 years. Suddenly, I was getting fined weekly. At first, I thought it was just coincidence. Then I talked to a friend who works in the city office. She couldn't say much, but she hinted that someone had been making regular complaints. Always anonymous. It wasn't hard to figure out who. That's when I started documenting everything. Every interaction, every violation notice, every inch of my yard. I even set up a camera facing the front of my house, just in case. The final straw came when I found one of Rick's friends, or maybe a contractor, standing in my backyard. Just standing there, no tools, no clipboard, just looking around like he was casing the place. I yelled at him to leave, and he walked off like nothing happened. When I asked Rick about it later, he shrugged. He must have been confused. We're working on measurements for my patio extension. His patio had nothing to do with my backyard. At this point, I had enough. But I wasn't going to fight this in the usual way. I didn't want more yelling matches or police visits. I wanted something solid. Something that couldn't be brushed off or twisted into more gossip. So I pulled out the old deed again and visited a real estate attorney. Turns out, not only was I right about the property lines, but Rick had already pushed his landscaping stones about 3 feet into my property. Every tree he planted along that edge? Mine now. The lawyer helped me draft a formal letter demanding he remove all encroachments within 14 days, or we'd be filing a civil suit. I paid to have the letter served. No more friendly notes in the mailbox. This time, it came from someone in a suit who handed it to him right at his front door. The next morning, he didn't come out to glare at me like usual. But I wasn't done yet. Because while I was digging through my old property records, I noticed something weird about his side of the fence. There was a narrow stretch of unclaimed land between our properties. A sliver about 3 feet wide, 20 feet long. It was listed in an old utility easement, but nobody had used it in years. And it was still technically public right-of-way, meaning anyone could apply to maintain it. So I did. Now I wait. A week passed with no sign of Rick. His porch light stayed off, and his usual loud phone calls on the patio stopped. It was quiet. Too quiet. I thought maybe the letter had finally scared him into backing off. Then I got a knock on the door. It was a woman in her 30s, dressed sharp, business casual. She introduced herself as Michelle, a representative from a local real estate group. She smiled and said, "We're looking to expand our residential portfolio in this area. Your neighbor Rick referred us to you. He said you might be interested in selling." I blinked. Selling? Absolutely not. She tilted her head, still smiling. "He told us you were considering retiring to Florida and looking to downsize." I laughed. "That's news to me. I'm not moving anywhere." She didn't seem surprised. "If you change your mind, we're making strong offers. We've already been talking to your neighbors." That's when it clicked. Rick was trying to buy up property around the block. Maybe for a flip, maybe to build something bigger. Maybe he'd been planning this for a while and saw me as an obstacle. First he tried to buddy up, then pressure me, then smear me. Now this? I told her firmly to remove me from whatever list they had and close the door. Later that week, another neighbor, Pete, who lives behind Rick, came by with a beer in hand. He's a retired firefighter and doesn't usually get into neighborhood drama. He said, "You know he offered to pay cash for my house, right? No inspection, full price." Pete had said no. Rick didn't take it well. A day after that, Pete found a dead squirrel nailed to his fence. The same morning his garden hose was sliced open. "I didn't say anything," Pete told me. "But now I'm wondering if this guy is more than just a pain in the ass." I started asking around. Quietly. Turns out Rick had been pestering multiple people about their property. Older folks, mostly. One couple down the street had taken his offer, but only after getting tired of his constant visits and accidental damage to their mailbox, sprinkler head, and porch lights. It wasn't hard to guess his pattern. He harassed them just enough to make them uncomfortable, then swooped in with an easy solution: sell and escape. I decided to dig deeper. I used the county website to look up property transactions. In the last 8 months, Rick, or rather, an LLC tied to his name, had bought 5 homes within a 2-block radius. I wasn't sure what his plan was, but he was turning the neighborhood into a game board, and I was the last square he couldn't flip. I gathered every piece of documentation I had. The survey, the lawyer's letter, notes on each weird incident, photos, the property map, everything. I made copies and mailed them to the city council, the zoning board, the neighborhood association, and even the local newspaper's tip line. I figured if he wanted to play games, he could do it in the spotlight. 2 weeks later, I got a reply. The zoning board said they'd been contacted by Rick's LLC months earlier about applying for a variance. His goal? To build a 6-unit luxury townhome where 2 of the old houses used to be. He needed to consolidate 3 properties into one and get permission to increase building height and parking access right through that narrow sliver of land I'd applied to maintain. The land he assumed no one would care about. The land I now had conditional control over. I contacted my lawyer again and asked how solid my application was. She said, "If you've kept it clean, maintained it, and paid the small fee for easement upkeep, it's yours to manage. That strip might be small, but legally, you're holding the key." So I started mowing it weekly. Put up a tiny sign, "Community Green, maintained by my name." Even added some potted plants. All perfectly legal. All within the agreement. Rick didn't confront me directly after that. But I saw him standing in his upstairs window a lot, just staring down at the strip of land like it had betrayed him. The street stayed quiet, but now it felt like a storm was waiting. And I knew Rick wasn't done trying. But neither was I. A month later, an official-looking envelope showed up in my mailbox. Certified mail. Inside was a notice of intent to sue. Rick, through his LLC, was claiming my use of the small public strip was blocking development and causing financial harm. He wanted me to remove the sign, the plants, and to give up management rights. I didn't panic. I called my lawyer. She was calm, said it was posturing. "He's betting you'll fold to avoid legal fees," she said. "He doesn't think you'll fight." So I fought. We filed a response with every document I had, photos of me mowing the strip, receipts for plants and maintenance, dated copies of my application, approval letters, everything. Then we counterclaimed for harassment, nuisance, and attempted trespassing, with a binder of documented events over the last year. Things escalated fast. Local media picked it up because of the public land dispute and the pressure Rick had been putting on other residents. A journalist even came by to interview me. I didn't hold back. I told the truth. Everything. When the article dropped, Rick's name, the LLC, and his pattern of buying out homes under pressure were front and center. It went semi-viral in our state. People started calling him a predator in local Facebook groups. The neighborhood began turning on him. Not just the people he tried to buy out, everyone. Then the dominoes fell. City inspectors suddenly took a renewed interest in all the properties Rick had purchased. Turns out, some of his renovations weren't permitted. Some of the houses he bought were being rented out illegally as short-term rentals. A couple of properties had building materials dumped on public sidewalks. Fines started piling up. He tried to fight those too, but the spotlight was already on him. And now, so was the heat. The real gut punch came when the zoning board officially rejected his request to combine properties and build the townhomes. They cited community opposition and existing easement management conflict. In other words, my little green strip stopped him cold. The day that decision came down, Rick lost it. I caught it on my front door camera. He stormed onto my property at 10 p.m., pulled up the small wooden sign I had installed on the green strip, and smashed one of the potted plants into the street. Then he threw the sign in my driveway and walked away. Police were called. He was charged with misdemeanor vandalism and trespassing. I handed over the video footage. He pled no contest in court, paid fines, and was warned to stay off my property permanently. After that, he disappeared for a while. His cars sat parked. Lights off. House dead quiet. Then one day, a moving truck showed up. He didn't even say goodbye. Just packed up and left. 3 weeks later, a realtor's sign went up. The house sat empty for months before it finally sold. Below market price. Rumor was Rick had to unload it fast because of financial trouble from all the fines and legal costs. He was also forced to dissolve the LLC due to zoning violations and lost permits on his projects. I can't lie. The day I saw that sold sign go up, I smiled. I watered my plants, trimmed the green strip, and sat on my porch sipping coffee while the new neighbors moved in. Here's the thing. I didn't come out of this perfect. I could have handled things quieter in the beginning. Maybe I was too proud. Maybe I escalated when I should have ignored him. But when someone tries to walk over you, manipulate you, lie about you, and turn your own community against you just for money, you don't roll over. You show them that the smallest patch of grass can ruin the biggest plans.